Hi, today from the beautiful, picturesque Visby on the Swedish island Gotland. Today we'll talk about the billionaires of the Middle Ages. See you in the next part. There was sea in the spot where I'm standing right now. The water reached up to the wall behind me. This is the wall between the medieval city of Visby and the former harbor of this Hanseatic city. The largest ships of that time in the Middle Ages came here to this harbor. And who owned these ships? Who did they belong to? They belonged to the wealthiest people of medieval Europe, of Middle Ages. These people were the Hanseatic merchants. What was the Hanseatic League? Hanseatic League was a union of merchants of Northern Europe. Generally, the union of merchants trading along Baltic Sea and Western Sea, or let's say Northern Sea, and many cities at the shores of these two seas belong to that union. It started here in Visby and in northern Germany, in the towns of Bremen, Hamburg and Lübeck. And people from Germany, the German merchants, noticed the strategic position of Gotland, where Visby is situated. Gotland is an island in the middle of Baltic Sea. And in the Middle Ages, there was no compass. There was no method to somehow judge your position in the sea, where you are at. So it was very difficult to navigate. And people used to navigate at sight. So they kept always close to the shore so they could see the shore, and they navigated, or they traveled along the shores. And every island that was somehow close to the shore, or relatively close to the shore, was an orientation point. So the traveling routes and the commercial routes went along the shores, or through the islands, or along the islands. So you could navigate only by somehow orientation points. And that's why the islands were strategically and commercially important in Middle Ages, and especially Gotland, that is situated in the middle of Baltic Sea. So every time you went from the east of the Baltic Sea to the west, and or vice versa, or from the north to the south and vice versa, you passed through Gotland, because this was just how you were traveling. This was your orientation point. And of course, this was a great opportunity to refresh your supplies for water, for food, and also to do some repairs maybe. So you more or less were forced to stop here at Gotland, and especially here in Visby. In the Middle Ages, starting from 12th century, the merchants of Germany, from Bremen, from Hamburg, from Lübeck, noticed the strategic position of Gotland, the commercial value of Gotland, and started to settle down in this town of Visby. And until 14th century, as many as half of the population of Visby was German, and they started to set up commercial connections that were sporadic before, and they started to organize them in permanent commercial connections. Actually, Hansa started as singular undertakings of several merchants putting together the capital and setting up or organizing several ships for a commercial venture, to go there, bring some goods there, sell them, and bring back some other goods. So like 2 or 3 ships and more, maybe 5 ships, maybe 10 ships. And because it was very dangerous in Europe at that time to travel. in Baltic Sea. Dangerous due to technical reasons. Ships were sinking or used to sink very often. So if you went with 2 or 3 ships, at least the people could get saved if one ship sank, and maybe some goods also. But if you went alone, you were just helpless, right? On the other hand, they were like hostile, maybe pirates, and hostile also nations that maybe robbed you, that maybe attacked you. So it was always better to have several ships, maybe also some striking power, some military power with you, and to travel to undertake such ventures. Later on it got better due to permanent connections. They started to sign like contracts for delivery, for buying goods and stuff like that. So it became more and more organized, more and more efficient. The volumes and the margins went up. By the way, in the Middle Ages, there were practically no land roads in Eastern and Northern Europe. Only the part of Europe where Roman Empire was located earlier, they developed a road system. There were land roads that could be traveled. In Eastern and Northern Europe, there was nothing like solid land roads. So all transportation and all trade happened actually along rivers and along seas, so along waterways. And all major towns or major cities were situated along these waterways. There was no logistic possibility for a city, for a town, a large town, to be situated apart or outside of a river, because there was no way to get goods to that town, right? It was extremely expensive and extremely difficult to get goods there. So land roads, solid land roads, existed actually only within cities, within towns. So the transportation was the easiest and the cheapest on waterways, and that's why it was they were used for commerce, and that's why Hansa in the first stage used waterways for the trade, and they set up these permanent connections that reached from let's say Flandria and northern Germany and Netherlands in the west, until all through the Baltic Sea to Novgorod, to Riga, to Reval at that time in the east. And there were also representations in London, by the way. And these towns that were situated along the shores, they started to integrate in this Hanseatic League. They own commercial connections, so they went down the rivers, and so large part of northern Europe, or of the towns in northern Europe, became part of Hanseatic League. In the golden age of Hansa, of this Hanseatic League, as many as 200 towns belonged to the league, and some estimations give a number of 300 towns that belong to Hansa. And the merchants of Hansa became extremely rich. Some of them were more liquid. They had more money, more liquid money than the rulers of the world at that time. And Hansa became also a huge political power and also a military power. And sometimes they decided about the kings, who became the king, and so on and so on. So they were involved, they were heavily involved in politics at that time as well, due to their commercial power and to the money that could buy a lot of things, right? And also could buy political power and military power. And why was it so profitable? It was so profitable because they had a very simple business model that is called arbitrage. And arbitrage is just using the price differences in different locations on different markets. And since they connected the Western Europe with the Eastern Europe, the North Europe with the South Europe, they used these price differences, these margins. And at that time, the price margins in Europe were extreme. It is comparable maybe with the margins that we have between Eastern Asia and Western world in our times. As to give you an example how it worked, for example, they took cloth, they took wine, they took beer, and they took corn from the northern shores of Germany and maybe from Flanders. And they brought it to Bergen in Norway, where they sold it. Then they bought stockfish and they bought timber in Bergen. They brought it to London, they sold it there, and then they bought wool in London and brought it again to Flanders, where the wool was processed. And so this was called a golden triangle in the Western Sea or the Northern Sea. And of course, the goods there, they weren't directly produced in these towns. For example, if you take wine and beer, of course, there is no wine and beer production in, let's say, Hamburg or Bremen in northern Germany. But these goods were produced down the rivers in, let's say, Köln, let's say Rhineland, let's say Pfalz in Germany, in the southern part of Germany, and they were transported and sold, traded in these Hanseatic shore towns, and then they stand for export, of course, to the other Hanseatic towns. So that's why if you just took a triangle like this golden triangle, you once traveled the triangle, made all the trades, you doubled, you tripled, you quadrupled your capital, and then you could do it again and again. So it was an easy business model. I mean, a simple business model. Of course, it wasn't that easy because you had, of course, to organize the capital. So the margins were so extreme that it was possible at that time, for example, to organize a fleet of ships here on Gotland, let's say 5-10 ships, loaded with goods. Bring the goods to London, sell it there, and buy other goods, bring it back to Gotland, sell it here, and then you were set for the rest of your life. So just one course like that made you wealthy already, made you extremely rich already. But the merchants of Hansa did it over and over and over again. Of course, it is easier to say than to do. You have to organize the capital to build or to rent the ships. You have to, of course, have the capital to buy the goods. You have to hire people and have the capital to hire them, to pay them, and so on. You have to take the risk, of course. You have to know what goods to buy here, what goods to sell, and so on and so on. So you have to have the knowledge, maybe the connections. It's a simple business model, but it's not easy to do, especially at these times. So now you know how it all worked. So the people, the merchants of Hansa, became so extremely wealthy that they have like magazine stores like this one that you see here in different Hanseatic towns. They had, of course, a lot of goods in store. They had fleets of ships, and they had also other properties like houses, maybe land outside cities. So they were extremely rich, and also they were liquid and had a lot of money to trade, and a lot of goods, merchandise to trade, and they were very influential. And stores like this here in Visby, I mean, Visby became an extremely rich medieval town by belonging to Hansa and being actually the hub of Hansa, if you want. And stores like that, they had hundreds of stores like that here along the walls or behind the walls of the harbor, and they are still many of them preserved here in Visby. And you see how wealthy Visby was in Middle Ages. Here I have never seen such a wealthy medieval town. I wonder, what are your thoughts about this topic, about the billionaires of Middle Ages? What did you learn from this video? Maybe some ideas how you can act, how you can improve your business. I invite you to leave a comment. That's it for today from the beautiful town of Visby. If you like this video, give me a thumb up. If not, of course, thumb down. I invite you to leave a comment. What do you think about the topic we were talking about? What is your experience? What is your perspective? Share this video with your loved ones, with your friends. One day they will thank you for that. I talk here a lot about business, about doing great, impossible things in your life and business. I talk here about how the best entrepreneurs in the world think and act, how self-made billionaires think and act. So if you like this video, you will certainly like my other videos. I invite you to watch them. Thank you for today from Visby, or as Swedish would say, hej då. I wish you a fantastic day. Let's do something extraordinary today.